right, in the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, love God. All right, good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Good evening, everyone. How are you all? All right. Great. So tonight we are going to be speaking about a very important topic, especially as we lead up to Pascha week in just a couple of weeks. Topic we're going to be talking about tonight is why walk with Jesus, and we're going to be speaking specifically about the idea of walking with Him not only in the triumphs but in the trials as well. Okay. So the question I want you guys to think about tonight is why walk with Christ? What's the benefit, the value? Is there any reason why you would look and say, this is the reason why I should walk with Christ? What do you get out of it, in other words? This isn't a rhetorical question. I'm asking you this question. And this is when I stop talking, you respond. Or you guys don't respond. All right, warming up.
Can you repeat the question?
Why walk with Jesus? Why? If you met someone and you wanted to convince someone that it was a good thing to be a disciple of Jesus, what would you tell them? Like, what do they get out of it, right? I mean, I just think from my previous job in sales, if I wanted to convince someone that something was good, that this piece of technology was good, I would have a list of reasons that I would tell people, this is why you should buy this piece of technology. Why walk with Jesus? Like, what's the benefit? What do they get out of it? What reason do you yourself walk with Him? What do you get out of it? Why walk with Him? That's the question. Does that make sense? Just in case you forget, it's right up here. And it's close over here if you've got your glasses at home. Right? Why walk with Jesus? What do you get out of it? What's the benefit? What's the reason? Why? Yes?
Now that I have a question.
Oh, yes. Thank God.
I was going to say, one of my reasons is a different outlook in life. So, when something bad happens, it's not like it's the end of the world. It's like, it happens for a reason or with a greater purpose. So, that kind of gives me comfort when something doesn't go the way I planned it.
Okay. Excellent. Other thoughts? Yes?
He's the truth. He's the truth. Everyone wants the truth.
He's the truth. And people are looking for the truth. Good. Excellent. Yes? Salvation. Okay. Could you maybe elaborate on that? Salvation.
No, the basis of our faith is that there's more to life than just living. There's like a continuation of it. And I mean, that's a good thing to believe in. It's not that it ends with death, it starts with death.
Okay. Excellent. Well said. So salvation, it doesn't end with this. When we leave here, that's just really the beginning of life. Good. Yes?
There's comfort in knowing that someone planned the whole way for you and that there's like a plan all along and you're not trying to just doing your own thing.
Okay. Good. Comfort in knowing that someone has planned or thought through and seen through our life before we've even been born in front of us. Yes.
Learning what true love is.
Excellent. So learning what true love is, having that perfect image of what love actually is. Good. Have a standard to compare what we think is love towards love. In fact, good. Anyone else? This side is taking all the good answers. I mean, you too as well. Okay, so good. So a lot of times when we talk about our own journey with Christ, most of us will look back at a certain point of our life and we'll say, it was at this point that I started my journey walking with Jesus, okay? For almost every one of us here, we've been baptized, and that in some ways started the journey. or started the relationship, but may not have actually started the journey for us in the sense that we experience it today. Okay? So let's suggest that the relationship started when you were baptized in a deeper sense, but at some point in your life, hopefully at some point in your life, you sat down and said, this faith is my faith. Okay? This Jesus is my Jesus. A couple weeks ago I was talking in church about baptism. I'm sharing with the church that there was a rite in the church that kind of paralleled the Jewish bar mitzvah, which usually happens around the ages of 12 and 13, right? Okay? And so around that age in the Christian church, you as a young lady and a young man would come at that time. It was the adult passage or the passage into adulthood. And you would stand before the altar of God and you would declare this to be your faith. And you would renounce Satan and you would accept Christ as your own. And you would say, I believe this. This is mine. Okay? And for each of us, we may not have had it in that structured way, but hopefully at some point, if you haven't already, then that's a question that you want to ask yourself is, why haven't I become that? Why haven't I done that? Okay? But for the vast majority of us here, hopefully, we've said at some point we can look back and say, I began actively choosing to walk with Christ and to being committed to the church and being committed to walking and holding on to this teaching as my own, as what shapes and informs the whole of my life. I can tell you when that was for me. And if you dig down, you might be able to say, I don't know the exact date, but I know roughly when that shift happened in my life. Okay? But what I want to encourage on is that sometimes, or impress on, is that sometimes what we do is we look back and we say, we'll never forget that time. Okay? We'll never forget that time, and we always look back as if it was this beautiful, glorious time in the past. And we'll talk about the glory days. I hear people talk about the glory days when they first started their relationship with God. Okay? They say, we'll never forget that time. Now, the problem that I want to offer to you today is that a relationship with God is not supposed to be simply something in the past, and not simply something in the future, but it's something present today. A relationship with Christ is now. Okay? Scripture makes it clear today is the day of salvation. When it speaks about Jesus, the title of the event of Jesus coming into the world is Emmanuel, God with us. It's always now. Okay? It's this moment. And when you leave here, it'll be in that moment. Okay? So it's never just simply enough about us saying, I remember 5 years ago when I recommitted to going back to church. And 3 years ago when I started serving. But it's us saying, today I want to walk with Him. Today I choose you. We want to, in other words, go beyond memory of the past. We want to remember, but we want to remember so that we call upon His presence here and now. And actually one of the beautiful things that you'll find throughout the whole Old Testament is this idea of remembrance. The Jewish idea of remembrance, God told them, I want you to remember when I led you out of Israel. I want you to remember when I led you through, out of Egypt. I want you to remember when I led you through the Red Sea. I want you to remember the Passover. I want you to remember, and He instilled certain things so that they would never forget. But it wasn't just so that they could remember some events that happened in the past, but so that they would remember His very presence with them, that He continued to deliver them in that very day. One of the first people that we remember where God revealed Himself in such a beautiful, powerful, majestic way was Moses. If you guys remember Moses, he was walking along the way, and in Exodus chapter 3, verse 3, it says the following. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Exodus 3. Okay? It says, Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Moses is walking along and he looks over and he sees this bush. And he thinks to himself, I'm going to pause and go over and see this strange sight. Moses paused long enough. He got still long enough on his way that he was able to notice something that was tremendous and that pulled him away. And the beauty of the burning bush is that it was so outrageous that it got his attention. The challenge with the burning bush is that it was so outrageous that it got his attention. And the reason that's a challenge is sometimes what we think is the only way God can come to me is in one of those events. Okay? So I want you to imagine that God comes to Moses in the burning bush. And each of you have a burning bush moment, hopefully at some point in your life, where you first are like awed and blown away by God. But God didn't only come to Moses in the burning bush, did he? He came to him not only at Mount Horeb, but in Sinai. Right? He came to him here. It's actually the same mountain, but they call it by two different names. He came to him here, but he came to him when he delivered to him the tablets, or the commandments. He came to him when he told him, strike the rock and water will come from it. He came to him when he led him out of Egypt through the Red Sea, right? But I want you to imagine you say, well, the only way God can come to me is in that way. And so what ends up happening? We live in the past. We live in the past. We say, no, I can only come to God in that way. Has to be in this formula. Has to be in this exact way. I felt this. The person who was leading sang this song. This person was speaking or preaching that day. Abuna so-and-so was there and he said this specific part of the liturgy that I never heard before. And unless if that exact formula happens exactly the way it happened that day, then I can't rekindle the fire of my relationship with God. And so what happens is we sometimes will take God and put him in a box. God, if he showed us anything in this event, is he doesn't work in boxes. Okay? No one ever thought this bush would burn but not be consumed. God doesn't work in that way. For us, if we really want to walk with him, we want to be present with him, we want to take away this idea that God only works, Jesus Christ only reveals himself in these three ways that I've experienced him in the past of my life. Okay? For sure, he'll speak to us through those channels, but he doesn't only speak to us in that way. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 3, it says the following. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, those who are here today, all of us who are alive. And so what I want to impress upon you tonight is that God is not making a promise for our parents and our grandparents and all the great saints who have lived throughout the last 2,000 years of Christianity. But God is making this covenant relationship with you today. This is not something for past generations, guys. What Jesus Christ has offered to our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and the people that have, the great heroes of faith that have been living and dying for Christ over the last thousands of years, is something that is, he's saying, is for you here today, those of you, all of us, he says, who are alive. This is for you and for me. This is for you and for me. So for us, when we talk about walking with God, there's a few images in the Bible that are really beautiful, really powerful. But in the first book of the Bible, there is this image of God walking with humans. And we find in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, that it says he walked with them in the cool of the day. He walked with them in the cool of the day. This means that there was a closeness, there was an intimacy. Like, we don't believe that the language of Scripture let me just put it that way, the language of Scripture when it says he walked with them in the cool of the day, what it's implying there is that there's a closeness, there's an intimacy there, right? That he was, as if he was close enough that they could touch him, right? I mean, imagine you're walking through a park and it's just you all alone in Central Park. Don't ever do this. But you're walking in Central Park all alone at night, and there's one other person walking with you. There's this intimacy that exists between you and that person who's there. Okay? The beautiful thing, I think, is that God, He extends this invitation to us to walk with Him. And it's predicated, it's based on this extraordinary love that He has for each of us. And I can't help but to think how much we talk about God's love, and how much sometimes when we talk about His love, it sounds so ordinary. It sounds ordinary, right? I mean, sometimes I hear people say, yeah, but God loves us. I mean, His love for us is extraordinary. And so this invitation to walk with Him, it's based on this extraordinary gift. This idea that He gives His own Son for us. This idea that He comes to walk with us. This idea that God, I was reading some nerdy theology books earlier today, and it was the author was talking about the idea of Christology. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with big boring words that he was using. Okay, but he was saying that the whole idea of Christology has to start with the idea that God became man and walked amongst us, and that. Every time I pause, every time I let myself pause to think about that God stepped into this world to walk amongst us and died on the cross for us, I'm in awe. It's like standing before the burning bush. Like I imagine Moses in that moment. I'm like, oh my God! Like you came into it's mind blowing. But what happens is we don't oftentimes pause to think about it, right? I mean, it's a formula that we know. But it's beyond that. It's His own love that brings Him into this world. And that is the basis of our invitation to walk with Him. That doesn't happen, we don't have an open invitation to walk with Him. Someone was texting me earlier, they asked me the question, they said, when Jesus' disciples went out, who were they supposed to preach to? The Jews or the Gentiles? I said, yes. And they said, but if Jesus never came, then what? I said, then you still have this small group of people, according to the Old Testament, right? The fact that God enters into this world, He's saying, I'm coming for all of you. I'm dying for all of you. And that's the very basis that we can walk with Him. That's the only reason that we can walk with Him. The only reason. Okay? The first man that says that he actually walked with God in the Bible is a man by the name of Enoch, and it says in Genesis chapter 5 that Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. I imagine he's walking down the beach and all of a sudden his ship is just left there. Okay? He's walking, if you've ever seen a pair of sandals sitting on the beach, maybe those were Enoch's sandals. Okay? He's just walking down the beach and all of a sudden he's gone. Okay? And he's just there. Enoch is walking with God, and then all of a sudden, he was not. He was not. He's the first man to uncover the true delight of what it means to walk with God. Enoch is the type of person who's walking along, and it's as if he's in a whole other world. You've met those people before. You've met Enochs, okay? Where they're people that are living amongst us, but they're walking through this world as if they're already in heaven. Right? That's Enoch. Okay? Those are the Enochs who are living amongst us. These are people who have learned to commune with God through every facet of their life. It's a beautiful painting from a Dutch painter named Gerard Hoet. And what you find here is this idea of Enoch being taken up in glory. He's walking with God, and God takes him up in glory. Now, what sometimes people think that this means is that God is somehow impressed by the pious life that Enoch is living. He was a nice, very pious person, and if you just get pious in your life, if you become a holy person in your life, you'll be taken up with God, up to heaven too. And by the way, if you walk with God, you'll be provided with an enormous house, a beautiful spouse, deep pockets. You'll have whatever things that you want. You'll have a gigantic bank account. You'll have a huge wife. You'll have all of these huge, big, beautiful things that you have wanted. And just walk with God, and that's exactly what you will get. Okay? What? Okay. That's what you get. Just walk with God, right? Just walk with Him, and all these big, beautiful things will come to you. What God is really saying in that story is not become pious, and you'll get these wonderful things. What He's saying in that story is, I like walking with you. I like walking with humans. What He's not saying is just become a pious person and just show up to church on Sundays and everything is good. He's saying, I want to walk with you, not just on Sundays, but I want to walk with you from Sunday to Sunday. I want to walk with you from Eucharist to Eucharist. I want to walk with you in the world. I want to walk with you in your life. I want to walk with you at your jobs. I want to walk with you when you're studying. I want to actually sit down next to you when you're taking your test. Not because my sitting next to you is going to give you an A+. Someone contacted me earlier this week, and they said, my parents told me that I'm not getting the grades that I want on the MCAT, but just pray and God will change my score on the MCAT. And I said, sweetheart, it doesn't work like that, okay? But you know what, nonetheless, God wants to sit next to you while you are failing the MCAT, while you're bombing it, okay? And for those of you who did really well, He might have been sitting next to you as well, okay? Fair enough, fair enough. The first man to truly walk with God is Enoch. In the Bible, there is a group of people that built these walls, and kind of, if you will, the antithesis, the opposite of walking with God are the people of Jericho. Now, if you guys know the story of Jericho, Jericho was an ancient city where there are two walls around. Do you guys know the story of Jericho? Okay, Jericho is a city that, as the children of Israel are led through out of Egypt, they wander around the wilderness for 40 years. They then enter into the land of Canaan, the promised land, and God says, okay, it's now the promised land, land of milk and honey. By the way, you need to go to war, okay? And they come up on Jericho. They come up on Jericho, this big, beautiful city with two walls. Archaeologists have actually uncovered that there was an outer wall, and then about 30 feet up, there was an upper wall. And what the children of Israel are told is march around the city for 6 days. Don't do anything else. Blow the trumpets, march around 6 days. And when I tell you, which ends up happening on the 7th day, you're going to do that again. You're going to march around those 7 times, and you're going to blow the trumpets, and you're going to yell, and the walls are going to come down. Okay? In the ancient city of Jericho, you have these walls. And this is what it says in Joshua chapter 6, verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, and no one came in. No one went out, and no one came in. What Jericho represents is not a people who are walking with God, but a people who are closed in on themselves. Okay? This is a people. Jericho for us is those of us who have built walls around ourselves and enclosed ourselves from other people. We've enclosed ourselves from walking with God. we've enclosed ourselves from loving relationships. The outer walls are the things that people see. These are the walls that sometimes we put up that are negative actions, negative words that push God, from our perspective, push God and push others away. But the inner walls, the upper walls are the negative thoughts that come to our minds that do the same thing, push others and push God away. And these are things, by the way, that prevent us from walking with God. And part of walking with God is walking with others. You can't have one without the other. In Hebrews chapter 10, the author of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says, do not forsake assembling together as some do, but come together that you might be encouraged by each other. Okay? So my relationship with God is not just about me and him, but walking with God means that I have to walk and be willing to walk with other people. But Jericho is, we are in the state or the city of Jericho when we build up these walls and isolate ourselves from others. In the very next chapter.
So, sorry,
yes.
Is there a spiritual, since this is the spiritual meaning of the walls, is there a spiritual meaning for the trumpets and the way they had the walls fell down?
Yeah. So, we sometimes, and I think as servants, I was reflecting on this a couple of days ago, we think sometimes as servants that if the way we get someone out of Jericho, is by going at them hard. And I think what's beautiful is Jericho wasn't conquered by the traditional art of war. Jericho was conquered by prayer. Okay? The walls were torn down, ultimately, not by their might, but by God. And their role was simply to pray. I think about it as in service when I'm serving someone, and hopefully if I'm that someone that's being served, that I have others who are doing this, that people are praying circles around me. Not literally walking around me, praying circles around me, right? But literally, in a sense, praying circles around me. And waiting for the besieger, the one who sieges the city, that tears down the walls, for him to break that heart of stone and tear it down. Okay. Fair question. So in the next chapter, after the city of Jericho, the children of Israel were told, they were told certain things that they were allowed to take and certain things that they were not allowed to take. Okay? And one of the guys, his name is Achan. Achan takes some silver. Okay? And as a result of that, when they go to battle the city called Ai, or Ai, it's spelled Ai. Small little Katkut city, like very tiny, okay? With no big walls or anything like that, they're embarrassed. They're run off. They lose. Okay? And basically what God tells Joshua is you need to figure out where the sin is in Israel and get rid of it, expel it, stone it if you will, cast it away from you, do whatever you need to do in order to get that sin away from you. So, if you will, if we're wanting to walk with God, but we're closing in ourselves from God to walk with Him, to walk with others, I think one of the first things that we do is that we have this willingness to stone the sin in the valley of, and the name of the valley is called Achor. Now, Achor is a Hebrew word that means trouble. Okay? So we take this stone, the sin, to this place of trouble, and he actually tells them we're not going to bring this back here, but what they do is they bring Achan out once they figure out who he is, and they stone him. Now, we're not going to bring stoning back these days, okay? But what it means for us spiritually is that if there is sin, hidden sin in our lives, and we're serious about walking with God and having victory with God, then we have to be willing to expose it. And sometimes that's painful. and we've got to be willing to bring it out to this valley of Achor, the valley of trouble. And sometimes this is a place of great despair and trouble for us when we expose it, and to stone it in that place, to cast it away from our midst. Okay? If we're serious about walking with God, that's, I think, one of the first things. And what that looks like for us is when we come for confession. When we come for confession. Okay? So Lent is really a beautiful and special time for that. But that's one of the things that we want to do is expose that sin and cast it out in the valley of Achor. There's one other time that you find the valley of Achor showing up. It's in Hosea chapter 2, verse 15.
That's for hope.
For hope. Yeah, exactly. Amen.
This is actually a very beautiful comparison. This.
So, Hosea chapter 2. With Hosea married to this prostitute named Gomer. And this is what God is speaking to Hosea. He says, I will give her her vineyards. Let me back up to verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, will bring her into the wilderness and speak comfort to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and will make the valley of Achor, this valley of trouble where Achan is stoned. He says, I'm going to take her out there. I'm going to make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. You remember when the children of Israel first came out of Egypt, how joyous they must have been, right? I mean, remember when you first started that journey, you were first walking with Christ, and you were like skipping along, and you're like excited about your walk with Christ, and God is good all the time, and you're just like so excited about it. And then we kind of like become like Gomer, we stray away a little bit, and we play the harlot a little bit. What God is telling them here, it's getting real hot in here. Can we turn that up?
I was just asking.
What he says here is, I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Have you ever been in a situation where your troubles, your difficulties actually become the door of hope? It actually becomes the place not of pain and suffering, but your troubles actually become the door of hope. It's that place where you end up remembering. It's when you kind of hit rock bottom. Okay? And you say, man. And rock bottom will look different for each of us at different seasons of our life. Okay? But that valley of Achor is a place God is saying, I want this valley of trouble to be a door of hope for you. Whenever you have a difficult situation, sometimes we say, like, why me? And what God is saying is, you're my child. If you have trouble in your life, let's use it to draw you back to me. Because you're my child. And I'll use whatever situation, either that you bring upon yourself, that others place upon you, or that I need to sometimes put you in order to get you back home. Okay? Why? Because he values walking with you more than you could ever imagine. Skip this here. Okay? I was thinking also about, we're just about done. Okay? I was thinking about a few characters during Bethel that walked with Christ, or that stood with Christ. And one of the people that jumps out is Simon of Cyrene. Now, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, you guys know St. Gregory the theologian? Okay, it's the second liturgy that we have 3 liturgies, Basil, Gregory, and Cyril. Okay, it's the second one. Okay, so St. Gregory, he says the following. He's asking the question, who are you? Who are you? Which person are you? He asks, first of all, if you are Simon of Cyrene, take up your cross and follow Christ. Okay? Saint Simon of Cyrene, it was a person who was walking along, minding his own business. But he's saying, if that is you, let yourself get pulled into a relationship with Christ. Okay? If that's you, and you're in La La Land, and you don't know what's about to smack you, he says, let yourself get pulled into that relationship with Christ. He says, if you are crucified beside him, if you're crucified beside him, let one of the thieves, now like the good thief, acknowledge your God. Acknowledge your God. Realize he doesn't deserve it. Realize who you are in light of him. Not so that you can poo-poo on yourself, but that you can say, I'm in need. And truly you are the Son of God. And acknowledge him in the midst of Achor, in the midst of your trouble. If you are Joseph of Arimathea, St. Gregory says, go to the one who ordered Christ's crucifixion and ask for his body. Okay? If you're in a place of comfort, of wealth, so to speak, things are good in life, then like Joseph of Arimathea, he says, get uncomfortable in order to go and serve Christ. Get a little bit uncomfortable in order to go and serve Christ who's sitting next to you at church. Get a little bit uncomfortable to go serve Christ who you walk by each day. Okay? He says, if you are a Nicodemus, bring spices and prepare Christ's body for burial. If you are one of the Marys or Salome or Joanna, weep in the early morning, be the first to see the stone roll back in Jesus himself. And if you're a Saint Mary or a John Beloved, standing at the foot of the cross, what is it that you see? Okay? The question is not, are you one of these people? But who are you and where are you and what will your walk look like? Okay? If I could leave you with 4 final very quick points. How do we continue walking with Christ? Our assumption tonight is that each of us is here because we have at some point committed to walking with Christ. And if we haven't, then I would ask you that is your starting point tonight. Okay? Is that you tonight say, I am committing myself. I was baptized at a certain point. I've strayed from God, but tonight I want to commit myself to walking with him and to living for him and to having him the center of my life. Okay? But in addition to that, part of what we do to continue walking with him is that we need to slow down to marvel at him. Because guys, we walk by him every single day. The burning bush is right there every single day of our life, and we oftentimes walk right by it and don't even acknowledge it. Okay? Number 2 is seek Christ in the time of trouble. In that valley of Achor, don't let difficulties, don't let the cross be that which pushes you away, but that's where you want to seek him more so. Okay? That's where you say, I want the valley of Achor to be the door of hope. I want the valley of Achor not to be what it was for Achan, but I want it to be for me what it was for Gomer, who was a harlot and ultimately led back into a relationship with God. Number 3 is surrender even when you don't know. Moses, when he was told, when he looks over and sees the burning bush, God says to him what? He says, come over. And what does Moses say? Here am I. Here I am. Okay? He didn't know what he was getting himself into. All he said was, Moses, Moses. He says, here I am. Okay? You know who else did that? You guys remember who else did that in the Old Testament? Who? Huh? Isaiah. Here I am. Send me. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. Okay? Surrendering is not saying, tell me where everything fits together and then I'll do it. Surrendering is God saying, I come here, walk with me, and you say, I don't know what that entails, but sign me up. Okay? Why? Because walking with you is the sweetest thing in the world. Walking with you, there's nothing else like it. And number 4 is to carry the fire of Christ onto the earth. We started way back with the burning bush. That fire, that beautiful fire. And if you look throughout the Old Testament, you find fire upon fire upon fire upon fire. And then if you go all the way to Luke chapter 12, verse 49, it says the following. It says, I've come to bring fire in the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. That fire of Christ at the burning bush, once you slow down to see it, and you stay with him in the time of trouble, and you surrender when he calls you, you say, Lord, I want to carry that fire with me wherever I go. And that means when we meet others who are in that place of trouble, who have erected walls around them, we don't try to beat them down with the fire, but we just simply pray circles around them. We walk Christ around those whom we love and whom we serve in our lives. Okay? I think God is inviting me to walk with Him. And I can't tell you that there's anything more precious and beautiful than that invitation. There's nothing greater than the gift of walking with Christ through this earth. Okay? I would urge you not to simply look at this as a stepping ground towards, but seek to experience Christ here in the fullest sense, even if, I'm not saying there's not, okay, I'm just using hyperbole. No one got it here saying Abuna said there's not, okay? But even if there was no afterlife, you say, I want to experience Christ in the fullest sense of the way on this earth as if there was nothing more, because He's that sweet and that good. And of course, there will be more, okay? Any questions?